What if I told you the reason most salespeople stay stuck year after year has nothing to do with their pitch, nothing to do with their product, nothing to do with the market, the economy, or even the competition? What if the reason you're not closing at the level you know you're capable of is because you've been playing the wrong game entirely? You've been trying to win, and here's the problem. You can't win. Not because you're not good enough, but because the game you're playing doesn't have a finish line. If that sounds like the episode for you, don't go anywhere.
Welcome to the Sales Evolution Lab, exploring the science of selling, from past wisdom to future innovation.
Welcome back, my friends. I'm Kyle Mackey, and if you're here, you're someone who takes selling seriously. You're not looking for tricks. You're not looking for hacks. You're looking for something real, something that lasts, something that actually explains why some salespeople seem to have a calm, quiet confidence while others are grinding, hustling, and still barely hitting quota. Today, we're going deep into a book that changed the way I see everything. Not just sales, not just business, but the way I think about my career, my relationships, my own sense of fulfillment. The book is called The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. Now, I know what some of you are probably thinking. Simon Sinek? That's not a sales book. And you're right, it's not. But here's why that matters. The best insights for selling rarely come from sales books. They come from the understanding of human nature. And that's exactly what Sinek does in his book. He gives us a lens through which to see everything differently. And when you apply that lens to sales, to the way you prospect, the way you handle rejection, the way you build relationships with clients, everything changes. Let me tell you why this hit me so hard. Years ago, when I was selling personal training at Movati Athletics, I had a moment that I didn't understand at the time. I was 19 years old, and I was obsessed with being the best. I wanted to be number one on the leaderboard. I wanted to beat everyone else in the chain. And you know what? By my second year, I was. About half the time, I was top salesperson in the entire company. Hundreds of trainers across the country, and I was at the top. By almost any measure, I was winning. But here's what I didn't tell anyone back then. Even when I was winning, I wasn't happy. There was this constant anxiety, this feeling like I had to keep proving myself every single month. If I had a great month, I'd think, okay, now I have to do it again. If I had a bad month, I'd spiral. I'd question everything. I'd wonder if I was actually good or just got lucky. I was exhausted, not because the work was hard. I love the work. I was exhausted because I was playing a game that had no end. I was trying to win at something that cannot be won, and I didn't have the language for it back then. But now I do. I was playing with a finite mindset in an infinite game. That's what this episode is about. The distinction between finite and the infinite games. And more importantly, what happens to your sales career, your confidence, your fulfillment, when you finally learn to play the right way. By the end of this episode, you're going to understand why the top salespeople don't actually try to beat their competition, why having a clear purpose matters more than having a killer pitch, why the best leaders and the best closers are willing to sacrifice short-term wins for long-term trust, and how you can shift your entire mindset so that rejection doesn't break you. Slow months don't define you, and you stop grinding on the hamster wheel of quarterly targets. You're going to walk away with a completely different way of thinking about your sales career, not as a race to be won, but as a journey to be lived, a craft to be mastered, a calling to be answered. Let's get into it. But first, let me set the stage, because this isn't going to be a typical book breakdown. I'm not going to summarize the chapters and move on. I'm going to show you how this applies to the work we do every single day. Every conversation, every pitch, every moment of rejection, and every moment of breakthrough. See, what I love about Sinek's work is that he doesn't just give you theory. He gives you a lens, a way of seeing that changes everything once you put it on. And when you apply that lens to sales, to the psychology of why people buy, why they trust, why they say yes, it becomes incredibly powerful. So stay with me. Whether you're a beginner just trying to find your footing or a veteran who's been in the game for years and feeling a little stuck, there's something here for you. This episode is about playing a different game. And the first step is to understand which game you're currently in. So let's start with the core idea. Simon Sinek didn't invent this concept. He borrowed it from a philosopher named James Carse, who wrote a book called Finite and Infinite Games back in 1986. But Sinek took the idea and applied it to business. And in doing so, he gave us something incredibly powerful, a way to understand why some people thrive over the long term and why others burn out, drop out, or lose their way. Here's the basic distinction. There are two types of games in the world: finite games and infinite games. A finite game has a known player, fixed rules, and a clear ending. Think about football. There are two teams. The rules are agreed upon. There's a clock. And when time runs out, someone wins and someone loses. The game ends. Everyone goes home. That's a finite game. Now think about something different. Think about marriage or friendship or raising a child. Is there a winner? Is there an ending? Is there a moment where you say, okay, I won parenting, game over? No, these are infinite games. The players may change, the rules may evolve, and the goal isn't to win. The goal is to keep playing. Now here's where it gets interesting. Business is an infinite game. There is no finish line. There is no final winner. There are companies that have been around for hundreds of years, and they're still not done. But most business leaders and most salespeople play as if business were finite. They're obsessed with winning the quarter, beating the competition, being number one. And when you play with that mindset, when you bring finite thinking into an infinite game, you set yourself up for exhaustion, for frustration, for burnout, because you're trying to win a game that was never designed to be won. Let me give you an example from the book that completely rewired how I see competition. Sinek talks about two education summits he spoke at. One was hosted by Microsoft. The other was hosted by Apple. At the Microsoft event, most of the presentation spent most of their time. At the Microsoft event, most of the presenters spent most of their time talking about how to beat Apple. They were obsessed with the competition. How do we catch up? How do we take market share? How do we win? A few months later, Sinek spoke at the Apple event, and something completely different happened. 100% of the presenters spent 100% of their time talking about how to help teachers teach and how to help students learn. Nobody mentioned Microsoft, not once. One group was obsessed with beating their competition. The other group was obsessed with advancing a cause. And the difference, that mindset difference, explains everything. Here's why this matters for you as a salesperson. Every single day, you have a choice. You can wake up thinking about how to beat the other reps, how to hit your numbers, how to close this deal so your manager gets off your back. Or you can wake up thinking about how to serve the person in front of you, how to solve a real problem, how to build a relationship that lasts years, not just long enough to get the signature. The first approach might work for a while. You might even win some months. You might even make more money short term. But over time, it wears you down because you're playing with the wrong mindset for the game you're in. I remember a guy I worked with during my fundraising days in New Zealand. Let's call him Ben. Ben was a closer. He could talk anyone into signing up. And for the first few months, he was at the top of the leaderboard. He was competitive, driven, obsessed with being number one. And here's what happened. About 6 months in, he started to slip. Not because he lost his skills, but because the game wore him out. He'd hit a goal, then immediately feel pressure to hit the next one. He'd have a great week, then a rough one, and spiral into self-doubt. He was constantly comparing himself to everyone else, and eventually, he quit. Said he was burnt out, said fundraising wasn't for him. But here's the thing. It wasn't fundraising that burned him out. It was his mindset. He was playing to win. And in an infinite game, that kind of thinking eventually runs you into the ground. Contrast that with another rep I knew, a woman who'd been in the industry for over a decade. She wasn't the flashiest. She didn't have the best pitch in the room, but she had something Ben didn't. She had staying power. She showed up every day with the same calm energy. She wasn't trying to beat anyone. She was just trying to get a little better, to learn something new, to connect with one more person. And over time, she built a career that was not only successful, it was sustainable. She played the infinite game, and that made all the difference. She wasn't burned out at 35. She was still growing, still learning, still finding meaning in the work. That's what an infinite mindset gives you. Not just success, sustainability. Now, here's what most people get wrong about this idea. They hear infinite game and they think it means ignoring results, not caring about numbers, just being soft and idealistic. No, that's not what this is about. Infinite players still hit targets. They still close deals. They still want to succeed. The difference is why they're doing it and how they measure success. For a finite player, success is the win, the closed deal, the leaderboard ranking. For an infinite player, success is staying in the game, building something that lasts, becoming the kind of person, the kind of salesperson who can keep going through good months and bad without losing themselves in the process. Let me say it another way. Finite players play to end the game. Infinite players play to keep playing. And when you understand that, you start to see your career differently. You stop measuring yourself against other reps. You start measuring yourself against who you were yesterday. You stop chasing short-term wins that could cost you long-term trust. You start building relationships that compound over years. You stop burning out every few months. You start building a career you can actually sustain. That's the shift. That's the big idea. But I want to make something crystal clear before we go any further. This doesn't mean you stop caring about results. Infinite players still want to close deals, still want to hit numbers. They still want to succeed. The difference is the relationship they have with those outcomes. And a finite player says, I need to close this deal or I'm a failure. An infinite player says, I'm going to do everything I can to serve this person. If it closes, great. If not, I'll learn and keep going. Same action, completely different energy. And here's what's wild. The infinite player usually closes more, not because they're pushing harder, but because they're calmer, more present, more genuinely connected to the person in front of them. Prospects feel that. They can sense when someone is trying to win versus when someone is trying to help. Sinek tells this story about the Vietnam War that completely reframes how I think about competition. The United States won almost every battle in Vietnam. They had more firepower, more resources, more technology. They decimated the enemy forces again and again. And yet, they lost the war. How? Because the U.S. was playing to win, and North Vietnam was playing to survive. The Americans were tracking body counts and territory. The Vietnamese were fighting for their independence, their families, their way of life. They would fight to the last man if they had to. And when you're playing an infinite game with that kind of resolve, you become almost impossible to beat. Not because you're stronger, not because you never stop. Eventually, America ran out of will. Public pressure at home mounted. Resources were exhausted, and they dropped out of the game. They didn't lose in the traditional sense. They just couldn't keep playing. That's what happens to salespeople who play finite in an infinite game. They don't necessarily fail. They just burn out. They drop out. They stop playing because fighting to win every month is exhausting. But playing to grow, to serve, to stay in, that's sustainable. That's the game that lasts. And here's something else I want you to understand. This isn't just theory. This shows up in real companies, real careers, real outcomes. Sinek tells the story of Microsoft versus Apple in the early 2000s. Microsoft launched a product called the Zune to compete with Apple's iPod. And here's the thing. The Zune was actually a great product. Beautifully designed, user-friendly, in some ways technically superior to the iPod. But it failed. It hit about 1% market share before Microsoft pulled the plug. Why? Because Microsoft built the Zune to beat Apple. Their whole strategy was finite. Take market share. Win the competition. But Apple wasn't playing that game. They weren't trying to beat Microsoft. They were trying to outdo themselves. They were asking, how can we serve people better? How can we make technology more human? How can we change the way people experience music? And while Microsoft was playing defense, Apple was already thinking about what came next, which turned out to be the iPhone, a device that didn't just beat the Zune, it made it irrelevant. That's the power of the infinite mindset. It frees you from playing reaction games. It lets you lead instead of follow. It gives you space to create instead of just compete. And it positions you to see opportunities that finite players completely miss. And that's where the real lesson begins, which brings us to the first principle. The thing that separates people who last from people who flame out. The thing that gives you staying power when the game gets long. A just cause. There's a story in this book that stopped me cold. It's about a man named Nikolai Vavilov. Vavilov was a Russian scientist who dedicated his entire life to ending world hunger. He spent decades traveling the globe collecting seeds from every corner of the earth. Tens of thousands of species, all stored in a seed bank in Leningrad. His vision was simple. If humanity ever faced a catastrophic famine, those seeds could be used to regrow food supplies and save millions of lives. It was a just cause, a vision of a future that many never fully arrived, but one worth dedicating everything to. Now, in 1941, the Nazis laid siege to Leningrad. For 900 days, the city was cut off. People were starving, dying in the streets. And in the nondescript building in the center of the city sat Vavilov's team, a small group of scientists surrounded by tons of seeds and potatoes, edible, life-saving, and they didn't eat a single one. 9 of those scientists died of starvation, surrounded by food, because they believed in something bigger than themselves. One of them, a scientist named Vadim Leknovich, later said this: "It was not in the least difficult to refrain from eating up that collection, for it was impossible to think of eating it up. For what was involved was the cause of your life, the cause of your comrades' lives." Let me say that again. They didn't think of it as sacrifice. They thought of it as purpose. Now, I'm not telling you this story to make you feel guilty for not willing to starve for your work. That's not the point. The point is this: when you are truly connected to a just cause, when you are driven by something bigger than your own comfort, your own numbers, your own paycheck, you become capable of things you never thought possible. You become resilient. You become steady. You become someone who doesn't fall apart when the months get hard or the rejection pile gets high, because you're not doing it for the money. You're not doing it for the leaderboard. You're doing it because the work matters. Think about the implications of this. Those scientists could have eaten the seeds. No one would have known. No one would have blamed them, but they didn't, because the cause was bigger than their hunger. The vision of a world without famine, a world they would never live to see, mattered more than their immediate survival. That's not rational in the short-term sense, but it's exactly the kind of thinking that creates lasting impact. It's infinite thinking at its purest form. So, what is a just cause? Sinek breaks it down into 5 criteria. A just cause must be for something, affirmative, not against something else. Must be inclusive, open to anyone who wants to contribute. Service-oriented, for the benefit of others, not just yourself. Resilient, able to withstand change over time. And idealistic, ultimately unreachable, something you can work towards forever. The last one is key. A just cause is not a goal. It's not a number you hit and then celebrate. It's a direction, a North Star, something you move towards, knowing you'll never fully arrive. Now, here's the application for sales. Most salespeople don't have a just cause. They have a quota. They have targets. They have managers breathing down their necks asking why they didn't close the deal. And so their entire world becomes finite. Hit the number, win the contest, make the bonus. But here's what happens when you operate that way. The work never feels meaningful. The rejection feels personal, and every slow week feels like failure because there's nothing underneath it. There's no foundation holding you up when things get hard. I'll never forget a conversation I had with a fundraiser I was coaching a few years back. She was struggling, not with her pitch, not with her technique. She just couldn't find the motivation. Every day, she just couldn't find the motivation. Every day felt like a grind. She'd go out on the doors, talk to a few people, get rejected, and come back defeated. So I asked her a question. I asked everyone, why are you here? She looked at me like I was crazy. For the money, obviously. And I said, okay, but why this job? You could make money at a lot of ways. You could make money a lot of ways. Why fundraising? She paused, then started to talk. She told me about her grandmother, how her grandmother had been sponsored as a child in a third world country, how that sponsorship had changed everything, paid for her education, gave her opportunities, eventually allowed her to immigrate and build a life, and how this woman sitting in front of me existed because of someone's decision to give. She had never thought of it that way before. But once she did, once she connected her daily work to something that mattered, everything changed. She wasn't knocking on doors to hit a quota. She was knocking on doors to give another grandmother's grandchild the same chance. That's a just cause. So let me ask you, why do you sell? Not for what company, not what product, why? What's the deeper reason? What's the thing that makes the hard days worth it? Because if you don't have an answer to that question, you're going to struggle. Not because you lack skill, but because skill alone doesn't sustain you. Purpose does. Here's what I want you to understand. A just cause doesn't have to be saving the world. It doesn't have to be curing disease or feeding the hungry. It can be simple. It can be personal. Maybe your just cause is helping people make better decisions. Maybe it's showing up for your family in a way your parents never could. Maybe it's proving to yourself that you can do something meaningful with your life. Whatever it is, you need it because the game is long and the only people who last are the ones who know why they're playing. I think about this a lot when I reflect on my own career. For years, I was chasing numbers, chasing leaderboards, chasing the feeling of being the best. And it worked until it didn't, until I hit a wall, until I realized that winning didn't actually make me happy. It just made me anxious for the next win. What pulled me out of that cycle was finding a different reason to do the work. I started thinking about the people I was talking to, not as prospects, not as conversations, as human beings with real lives, real struggles, real decisions to make. And I started to see my job differently. Not as selling something, but as serving someone. That shift from transaction to transformation, that's what gave me staying power. That's what kept me in the game when others dropped out. And it's available to you if you're willing to look for it. And here's something important to understand. Your just cause doesn't have to stay the same forever. It can evolve. What motivated you at 20 might be different from what motivates you at 40. The key is to have something, to know why you're playing. Because when you don't, you're at the mercy of every up and down. Every rejection hits harder. Every slow week feels like failure. Every success feels empty because there's no context for it. But when you have a cause, when you know why you're doing the work, those ups and downs become part of the journey, not the definition of your worth. Let me share one more thought on this before we move on. Sinek makes an important distinction in the book. A just cause is not the same as a goal. Goals are finite. You hit them and they're done. A just cause is infinite. It's a direction you move towards, knowing you'll never fully arrive. It's like chasing the horizon. You'll never get there, but the chase itself gives your life meaning. In sales, your quota is a goal. Your cause is why you're chasing it. And the salespeople who confuse the two, who think the goal is the point, they're the ones who struggle most. Because once you hit the number, there's always another number. And if that's all you're playing for, the game never feels complete. But if the number is just a marker of progress towards something bigger, towards serving people, building a life, becoming who you're meant to be, then every step of the journey matters, not just the destination. Which brings us to the next lesson, because having a just cause is only part of the equation. You also need a team, not just any team, a team you can trust. And that starts with a very different question than most companies ask. There's a question the Navy SEALs ask that most companies never think about. It's a simple question, but the answer reveals everything. They evaluate every candidate on two dimensions: performance, meaning skill, ability, results, and trust, meaning character, reliability, and the willingness to have your teammates back. Now, most organizations only care about performance. Who's hitting their numbers? Who's producing? Who's crushing it? But the SEALs discovered something interesting. The highest performers with the lowest trust, they call them toxic stars, are the most dangerous people on the team. Not because they're bad at their jobs, but because they're only looking out for themselves. They hoard information. They undermine others. They create a culture of fear and competition instead of cooperation. And here's the thing. In a high-stakes environment, whether it's combat or sales, the kind of toxicity can destroy an entire team. So the SEALs will actually choose a medium performer with high trust over a high performer with low trust every single time, because they know something most companies forget. Teams don't win on talent alone. They win on trust. Sinek calls this will before resources. It's one of the most powerful ideas in the book, and it completely changes how you think about what makes a team or an individual successful. Here's the concept. Most leaders focus on resources. How many reps do we have? What's our budget? What tools can we give people? But Sinek argues that resources are finite. They run out. They fluctuate. You can't always control them. What you can control, what truly determines whether a team survives the hard times, is will, morale, belief, the internal fire that keeps people going when external conditions get tough. And here's the key insight. Will doesn't come from incentive. It doesn't come from bonuses or threats or leaderboard rankings. Will comes from feeling like you matter, from being part of something bigger than yourself, and from knowing that the people around you have your back. There's a story in the book about a barista at the Four Seasons Hotel in Las Vegas. His name was Noah, and Sinek asked him a simple question. Do you like your job? And Noah said something that stopped Sinek in his tracks. He said, I love my job. Now, Noah also worked at another hotel in the city. Same job, barista. But he didn't love that job. Sinek asked why. And Noah explained. At the other hotel, the managers were always looking for what he did wrong. watching for mistakes, making him feel like he was constantly being evaluated. But at the Four Seasons, the managers asked a different question. They walked the halls and asked, is there anything you need to do your job better? Not what did you screw up, but how can we help? That one shift from policing to supporting changed everything. Noah said something that has stuck with me ever since. He said, but at the Four Seasons, the managers asked a different question. They walked the halls and asked, is there anything you need to do your job better? Not, what did you screw up? But how can we help? That one shift from policing to supporting changed everything. Noah said something that has stuck with me ever since. He said, only at the Four Seasons do I feel like I can be myself. Now, here's what most people miss. Noah wasn't a different person at the two hotels. He had the same skills, the same personality, the same training. The only difference was the environment. At one place, he hid his mistakes. At the other, he felt safe to grow. And when people feel safe, when they trust the people around them, they give more. Not because they're forced to, but because they want to. That's discretionary effort. That's will. And you can't buy it with a bonus. There's a term Sinek uses that I love. He calls it the circle of safety. It's the idea that great leaders create an environment where people feel protected, where they don't have to spend energy defending themselves from internal threats, so they can focus all their energy on external challenges. When people feel safe, really safe, they take risk, they innovate, they admit mistakes, they collaborate instead of compete. But when people feel unsafe, they hide, they hoard, they cover their backs instead of having each other's backs. That's the difference between a team that survives and a team that thrives. And it all comes down to trust. This shows up everywhere in sales. I've worked on teams where the culture was pure competition, where reps would hide their best techniques from each other, where hitting numbers was all that mattered. And everyone else was just in their way. And I've worked on teams where people genuinely helped each other, where someone would share a pitch that worked, where a struggling rep could ask for help without being judged, where the success of one person lifted everyone. Guess which team performed better over time? It wasn't even close. The trusting team always won, not because they had better talent, but because they had better culture. There's another story in the book about Ford Motor Company. In 2006, the company was losing billions of dollars. They brought in a new CEO named Alan Mulleney. And Mulleney noticed something immediately. Every week, the executives would meet and present color-coded slides. Green meant everything was fine. Yellow meant there were concerns. Red meant there was a problem. Week after week, every slide was green. Now think about that. The company was hemorrhaging money, on the verge of collapse, and every executive was saying everything was fine. But Mulleney knew something was wrong, so he pushed. He kept asking, is everything really okay? Finally, one executive named Mark Fields did something brave. He showed a red slide. He admitted there was a problem, and the room went silent. Everyone expected Fields to be fired. But Mulleney didn't fire him. He started clapping. He said, Mark, that is great visibility. Who can help Mark with this? And that moment changed everything because it told the entire organization something new. It said, you can tell the truth here. You can admit when you're struggling. You won't be punished. You'll be helped. And once that culture was established, the problem started getting solved because people weren't hiding anymore. They were trusting. So what does this mean for you? It means this. If you want to be great over the long term, You need to be part of a trusting team. And if you can't find one, you need to help build one, because no amount of talent will save you in a toxic environment. The stress alone will wear you down. But in a trusting environment, even average performers can become exceptional because they're not wasting energy protecting themselves. They're channeling everything into work. I think about this every time I coach someone new. One of the first things I ask is what your team's like. Do you feel safe? Can you be honest about what you're struggling with? Because if the answer is no, we have a bigger problem than your pitch. We have a culture problem, and culture will eat technique for breakfast. Now, I want to be clear about something. Trusting teams don't mean everyone holds hands and sings songs. It's not about being soft. It's about being real. It's about being able to say, I don't have the answer right now, or I need help with this, or I made a mistake and here's what I learned. That kind of honesty is the foundation of growth, and it only happens when people feel safe. So here's the question for you. Are you on a trusting team? And maybe more importantly, are you someone your teammates can trust? Because trust is a two-way street. If you want people to have your back, you have to have theirs first. That's how will gets built, not through incentives, through relationships. Let me expand on this a bit, because I think it's one of the most underrated ideas in sales. Most sales managers focus on tactics. What's the script? What's the pitch? What's the objection handling framework? And those things matter, but they're not the foundation. The foundation is culture. The foundation is whether people feel safe, whether they can be honest, whether they can ask for help without being judged. And in my experience, the teams with the best culture always outperform the teams with the best tactics, because tactics can be copied. Culture can't. I saw this firsthand when I was running a fundraising team in New Zealand. We had one team that was technically excellent. They knew all the right words. They had the training down, but the culture was cutthroat. Reps were competing against each other instead of with each other, hoarding techniques, talking behind each other's backs. And their numbers were okay, but never great. Then we had another team, less polished, fewer stars, but they genuinely liked each other. They'd debrief together after a tough day, share what was working, celebrate each other's wins. And over time, that team crushed it. Not because they were more talented, but because they had will. They had trust. And that made all the difference. Here's what I want you to take from this. If you're on a team right now, you have influence. You may not be the manager. You may not set the culture from the top, but you can model trust. You can be the person who helps others, who shares what's working, who admits mistakes openly. And when you do that, you become a leader, regardless of your title. That's how culture gets built. One person at a time, one choice at a time. Which leads us to the next lesson. One that might surprise you, because it's not about ignoring your competition. It's about reframing them entirely. Let me tell you about a moment in the book that made me completely rethink competition. After speaking at the Apple Education Summit, Sinek shared a taxi with a senior Apple executive. And being Sinek, he decided to stir the pot a little. He looked at the executive and said, "You know, I spoke at Microsoft recently, and they gave me their new Zune. And I have to tell you, it's so much better than your iPod Touch." Now think about that for a second. He told an Apple executive that a competitor's product was superior. What would you expect the response to be? Defensiveness? Irritation? Some kind of rebuttal about why Apple was still the best? Here's what actually happened. The executive smiled, nodded, and said 4 words. "I have no doubt." And that was it. No defense, no argument, no stress, just calm acceptance. Sinek didn't understand it at first, but later he realized what he had witnessed. That executive wasn't playing to beat Microsoft. He wasn't obsessed with winning some imaginary competition. He was playing an entirely different game. Apple wasn't trying to outdo Microsoft. Apple was trying to outdo itself. And when you play that way, when your primary competitor is your own previous best, you stop reacting to what everyone else is doing. You stop chasing. You start leading. This is the concept of a worthy rival. Sinek doesn't invent the term, but he redefines it beautifully in this book. A worthy rival is not someone you want to beat. It's someone who reveals where you need to get better. They're not your enemy. They're your mirror. And the best players in any infinite game learn to use their rivals not as a threat to be eliminated, but as teachers to be studied. Here's what most salespeople get wrong. They see other reps as competition. They see other companies as the enemy. And they spend all their energy trying to beat them. What's their pitch? What are they closing? How can I do better than them? But here's the problem. That kind of thinking is exhausting because you can never actually win. Even if you beat them this month, there's next month and the month after that. And eventually someone new will come along who's better than you at something. So what then? Do you just keep chasing forever? The infinite player thinks differently. Instead of asking, how do I beat them? They ask, what can I learn from them? Instead of seeing a competitor's success as a threat, they see it as information. If someone else is closing better than you, the question isn't, how do I take them down? The question is, what are they doing that I'm not? What can I adopt? What can I improve? Sinek writes openly about his own worthy rival, Adam Grant, the best-selling author and organizational psychologist. Sinek admits he used to feel insecure when he saw Grant's success. Grant's books would sell. His TED Talk would go viral, and Sinek would feel that twinge of jealousy, that competitive sting. But over time, he reframed it. He stopped seeing Grant as someone to beat and started seeing him as someone to learn from. What was Grant doing that Sinek could improve on? Where was Grant stronger? And how could Sinek use that insight to get better himself? That shift from external competition to internal improvement is everything. I experienced this firsthand during my fundraising days in Australia. There was a rep on another team who was absolutely crushing it. Every week, he was at the top of the leaderboard. And honestly, I was a bit jealous. I didn't want to admit it, but I was. I'd watch his numbers come in and feel this knot in my stomach, like somehow his success meant I was failing. Until one day I decided to do something different. Instead of resenting him, I went up and asked him a question. What are you doing differently? And you know what? He told me. He walked me through his approach, showed me how he was handling objections, shared a line he was using at the booth that I'd never thought of. And I realized something important. He wasn't my enemy. He was my teacher. I just had to be humble enough to learn. That's the mindset shift. From seeing rivals as threats to seeing them as a gift. Because here's the truth. No one gets better in isolation. We grow through friction, through challenge, through being pushed by people who are better than us. And if you can learn to embrace that instead of fearing it, you unlock a whole new level of growth. Now, this doesn't mean you ignore competition entirely. You can still want to win. You can still push yourself to be the best. But the frame changes. You're not trying to beat them to prove something. You're studying them to become something. And that's a very different energy. One is anxious and reactive. The other is calm and curious. Let me give you a practical example. Let's say there's another rep in your company who closes more deals than you. The finite player response is jealousy, or worse, sabotage, hoarding leads, talking trash behind their back, hoping they slip up so you can pass them. The infinite player response is different. They study them. What do they say on calls? How do they follow up? What's their energy like? And then you ask yourself, what can I take from this? Not to copy them, but to evolve. Here's something I've learned over the years of doing this work. The best salespeople I've ever met don't spend much time thinking about other salespeople. They're focused inwards on their craft, on their growth, on getting 1% better every day. And when they do look outward, it's not to compare, it's to learn. That's the mindset that lasts. That's the mindset that wins the infinite game. Let me give you a specific framework for this. When you notice someone doing better than you, there are two paths. Path one, react, feel jealous, get defensive, tell yourself they're just lucky, or the system is rigged, or they don't deserve it. That's the finite response. Path two is to reflect. Ask yourself, what specifically are they doing that I'm not? Is it their energy, their preparation, their follow-up, their ability to listen? Then ask, is that something I can learn? And if the answer is yes, go learn it. Not because you're trying to beat them, but because you're trying to become the best version of yourself. There's a famous tennis rivalry that illustrates this perfectly. Chris Evert and Martina Navratilova. They faced each other over 80 times over the course of their career. One of the greatest rivalries in sporting history. And later in life, they became close friends. Why? Because they understood something most competitors don't. They make each other better. Navratilova once said that Everett was the reason she became a great player. Not an enemy to be destroyed, but a mirror that showed her where she needed to improve. What a worthy rival. So here's your exercise. Think about someone in your world, a rep, a competitor, a colleague, who consistently outperforms you in some area. Instead of resenting them, ask yourself, what are they doing that I'm not? What could I learn from them? And how could I use their excellence to push myself forward? That one reframe can change your entire relationship with competition and free you from anxiety that comes from constantly trying to beat everyone else. And speaking of lasting, there's another piece of this puzzle we need to talk about. Because even if you have a just cause, even if you're on a trusting team, and even if you've learned to use your rivals wisely, there's still going to come a moment where everything changes. A moment when the thing that's been working suddenly stops working. And in that moment, you have a choice. Do you hold onto what was? And in that moment, you have a choice. Do you hold on to what was, or do you evolve into what's next? That's what the next lesson is about. There's a word for what happens when you refuse to change. Obsolescence. And in the infinite game, the only way to avoid it is to stay flexible. Not just in your tactics, but in your very identity. Sinek calls this existential flexibility. It means being willing to make a fundamental shift in your business model, your strategy, or even your understanding of who you are in order to better advance your cause. It's not a defensive move, it's offensive. It's not reacting to failure, it's preempting it. And it's one of the hardest things any leader or any salesperson will ever have to do. Let me give you an example from the book that floored me. Walt Disney. Now, most people know Disney as a movie company, but here's what most people don't know. By the early 1950s, Walt was frustrated. The company had gone public. There was bureaucracy. There were union struggles. There was pressure from shareholders. And Walt felt like the movie business was no longer allowing him to fully advance his cause, which was to bring wonder and escape to people's lives. So he did something crazy. He sold his assets. He borrowed against his life insurance, and he started a completely new venture, Disneyland. Think about that. This was a man at the height of his success. Snow White had been a massive hit. He had one of the most recognized entertainment companies in the world, and he blew it up. Not because the movie business wasn't working, but because he saw a better path forward. He wanted people to not just watch the magic, he wanted them to live inside it. And the only way to make that happen was to leave behind what was comfortable and step into the unknown. Sinek writes that Disney once said, Disneyland will never be finished. It's something we can keep developing and adding to. Listen to that. Never finished. Always evolving. That's the infinite mindset. And it required Walt to let go of the things that made him successful in order to chase something even bigger. Now, let me tell you about a company that didn't make that choice, Kodak. In 1975, a Kodak engineer invented the first digital camera. Let me say that again. Kodak invented digital photography. They had the technology before anyone else. And what do? They buried it because their business model was built around film. They made money selling film and developing photos. And digital threatened all of that. So instead of embracing the disruption they had created, they hid it. They protected their current revenue instead of advancing their cause. And by 2012, Kodak filed for bankruptcy. The irony is painful. Kodak's founder, George Eastman, had a beautiful vision. He wanted to make photography as convenient as the pencil. He built a company that cared about its employees, invested in its community, and changed the world. But the leaders who came after him lost sight of that. They became obsessed with protecting the product instead of advancing the mission. And when the world changed, they couldn't change with it. This is existential flexibility, or lack of it. The companies that last are the ones willing to reinvent themselves, not because they're failing, not because they see a better path forward. And the salespeople who last, they do the same thing. Let me bring this home to you. At some point in your career, something that's been working is going to stop working. Maybe the market will shift. Maybe technology will change. Maybe a new competitor will emerge. Maybe you'll get older and the energy you used to have just won't be the same anymore. When that happens, you have two choices. You can cling to what was, or you can evolve into what's next. I went through this myself for years. My entire identity was wrapped up in being a top performer. That was who I was, the guy who hit the numbers, the guy who won. But at a certain point, I realized that identity was a cage. It kept me stuck in a game I was trying to win instead of free to grow. And the moment I let go of that, the moment I stopped needing to be the best, something shifted. I started thinking about what I actually wanted to build, not just what I wanted to achieve. I started thinking about who I wanted to become, not just what I wanted to close. And that's when my career stopped feeling like a grind and started feeling like a calling. And honestly, that's exactly what's happening in my life right now. I could have kept doing what I was doing. My fundraising company has put me in a financial situation I once could have only dreamed of. A company that could provide a very comfortable life for years to come. A business that's working. But something shifted. I started asking myself, is this all there is? Is this what I want to be doing for the next 20 years? And the answer was no. Not because the work wasn't good, but because I saw a bigger path forward. Instead of selling on behalf of charities and other organizations, I realized I could help the organizations themselves. I could help the real human salespeople within them, help them become better sellers, better communicators, better people in general, so that they can sell more, impact more, and live better lives. That's why I started the Sales Evolution Lab, this podcast, do speaking engagements, trainings, coaching, mentoring. It's all part of the same vision, not just to build another business, but to build something that helps others build theirs. That existential flexibility in action, letting go of what's working to pursue what matters more. And I'll be honest, it's scary. There's no guarantee it works, but that's the infinite game. You don't get guarantees, you get purpose. And that's enough. Existential flexibility isn't easy. It asks you to give up certainty. It steps you into discomfort, to let go of the version of yourself that's been working in order to become the version that's needed next. But here's the thing. The people who do this, the ones who are willing to reinvent themselves, they're the ones who stay in the game. The ones who refuse, they get left behind. There's another story in the book that shows this beautifully. It's about CVS. In 2014, CVS made a decision that stunned Wall Street. They announced they would stop selling tobacco products completely. This was a decision that cost them about $2 billion a year in revenue. Analysts thought it was crazy. They called it Oz-like, as in living in a fantasy world. But CVS stayed the course. Their argument was simple. They were a health company, and selling cigarettes, products that killed their customers, was inconsistent with their mission. They chose integrity over income. And you know what happened? At first, it hurt. But over time, customers trusted them more. Employees believed in the company more. Partnerships with health organizations opened up, and eventually their stock price doubled. The lesson? Sometimes the right thing and the hard thing are the same thing. And the companies and the people willing to sacrifice short-term comfort for long-term alignment are the ones who win the infinite game. Now, here's what I want you to take from this. Existential flexibility doesn't mean chasing who you are. It means changing how you express who you are. Your core values stay the same. Your cause stays the same. But the tactics, the strategies, the way you show up, those have to evolve. Because the world keeps changing. And if you don't change with it, you get passed by. So here's the question. Is there something in your sales career right now that used to work but doesn't anymore? A script, a mindset, a definition of success. And more importantly, are you willing to let it go? Because the next level of your career isn't waiting for you to do more of what's already working. It's waiting for you to become someone new. That's existential flexibility, and it takes courage. So let me give you a practical way to think about this. In sales, there are things you can control and there's things you don't. You don't control the market. You don't control what competitors are doing. You don't control whether a prospect's budget gets cut, but you do control how you respond. You control whether you adapt or resist, and the salespeople who last are the ones who embrace change instead of fighting it. I've seen this play out so many times. A rep who's been successful for years suddenly starts struggling. The market shifts. The technology changes. What used to work doesn't work anymore. And they have two options. Option one is to double down on what they've already done. Work harder, push more, refuse to change. Or option two, step back and ask, what's different now? What do I need to learn? What do I need to become? The first path leads to frustration. The second path leads to evolution. Here's what I've learned about flexibility. It's not a one-time event. It's a practice, something you build into your career. The best salespeople I know are constantly asking themselves, is this still working? What's changing in my market? What do I need to learn next? They're never done evolving, and because of that, they never become obsolete. Sinek talks about companies that failed to flex, Kodak, Garmin, the railroads, but he also celebrates the ones that did it well. CVS stopping selling cigarettes even though it cost them billions. The Swiss Army Knife Company completely reinvented itself after 9/11 because their core product was banned from planes. They could have collapsed. Instead, they diversified into travel gear and watches and doubled their revenue. What made that difference? Leadership that was willing to let go of the old to embrace the new. That's existential flexibility, and it applies to your career just as much as it applies to business. So here's the question one more time. Is there something in your sales career right now that used to work but doesn't anymore? A script, a mindset, a definition of success, and more importantly, are you willing to let it go? Because the next level of your career isn't waiting for you to do more of what already worked. It's waiting for you to become someone new. That's existential flexibility, and it takes courage, which brings us to the final lesson. Everything we've talked about today requires one thing: courage. The courage to pursue a just cause, when everyone else is chasing quotas, the courage to build trust when everyone else is hoarding information, the courage to learn from rivals when everyone else is trying to beat them, the courage to reinvent yourself when everyone else is clinging to what worked. Sinek doesn't sugarcoat this. Playing the infinite game is hard, not because the principles are complicated, but because the pressure to play finite is everywhere. The system we operate in, corporate culture, sales management, Wall Street, even social media, it all rewards short-term thinking. Hit the quarter, beat last year, be number one. And when you choose to play differently, when you choose to build for the long term instead of optimizing for the next bonus, you will face resistance from your boss, from your peers, sometimes from yourself. Because finite thinking is seductive. It offers clear wins, immediate gratification, a leaderboard that tells you exactly where you stand. The infinite game offers none of that. It offers meaning, it offers fulfillment, it offers a career that actually lasts. But you have to be willing to delay the reward. You have to be willing to look bad in the short term to win the long term. And that takes courage. Let me tell you about a moment that tested mine. This was years ago during my time in fundraising. I was managing a small team, and we had a rep who was struggling. She wasn't hitting her numbers. She was inconsistent. On paper, she was a liability. The conventional move would have been to let her go, replace her with someone who could produce. And honestly, that's what one of my mentors suggested. But I saw something in her. She cared. She showed up. She was coachable. She just hadn't figured it out yet. So I made a decision. I was going to keep her on and coach her harder. Even if it hurt my team's short-term numbers, even if it looked like the wrong call from the outside. And for a few weeks, it did hurt. Our numbers dipped, and I had to defend my decision. But I stayed the course. And you know what? About 6 weeks later, something clicked for her. She started closing. She gained confidence. And by the end of that campaign, she was one of our most consistent performers. If I'd played finite, if I'd optimized for the short term, I would have cut her. And I would have missed out on one of the most rewarding coaching experiences of my career. That's what courage looks like in the infinite game. It's not loud. It's not flashy. It's quiet conviction. It's doing the right thing even when no one's watching, even when it costs you. Sinek talks about the importance of leaders modeling the behavior they want to see. And here's the thing. Even if you're not a manager, even if you're an individual contributor with no one reporting to you, you still are a leader. You lead by how you show up. You lead by how you treat your colleagues. You lead by examples you set. And if you want to play the infinite game, you have to lead yourself first. That means asking hard questions. Am I making this decision for the short term or the long term? Am I building trust or just extracting value? Am I learning or just defending my ego? Those questions don't have to be easy to answer. And the courage to ask them and to act on what you find is what separates infinite players from everyone else. Let me tell you about one more story from the book that embodies this. It's about a company called The Container Store. In 2008, the economy collapsed. Sales at the Container Store dropped 13%. Now, most companies would have done what companies do in that situation. Layoffs, cost cutting, protect the bottom line. But the leaders of the Container Store made a different choice. Instead of firing people, they froze salaries. They shared the hardship across the entire organization. And here's what happened. Employees voluntarily found ways to save money. They downgraded their hotel stays when traveling. They suggested ways to cut costs without cutting people. Even vendors trimmed their prices to help the company survive. Why? Because the culture was built on trust. The leaders had taken care of their people for years. And when the hard times came, the people took care of the company in return. That's will before resources in action. And it only happens because the leaders had the courage to prioritize people over profit, even when it was scary. So what does this mean for you? It means this. Playing the infinite game isn't something you do once. It's something you choose every single day. Every time you're tempted to take a shortcut, you choose. Every time you're pressured to hit a number at the cost of a relationship, you choose. Every time you feel the pull of the finite thinking, you choose. And those choices add up. They define who you become. They determine whether you burn out in 5 years or thrive for 50. Here's the hard truth. Not everyone will understand you. Not everyone will support you. There will be moments when you feel alone, when you wonder if you're doing the right thing, when the finite players around you seem to be winning while you're still planting seeds. But here's what I've learned. The seeds grow. The trust compounds. The career you're building, the one rooted in purpose, in service, in relationship, it lasts. And the finite players, eventually, they burn out, or they move on, or they look back and wonder why they were never fulfilled. You don't have to be them. You just have to have the courage to play a different game. I want to leave you with one more thought on courage before we move on to the toolkit. Courage isn't something you either have or you don't. It's something you build through practice, through small choices made consistently over time. Every time you choose trust over politics, every time you choose honesty over performance, every time you choose the long game over the quick win, you're building your courage muscle. And the stronger that muscle gets, the easier it becomes to make the right choice, even when it's hard. Sinek talks about this as a daily practice, not a one-time decision, but a way of living. Every morning, you wake up with a choice. Will I play finite today, or will I play infinite? The answer isn't always obvious. There will be pressure. There will be temptation. There will be moments when the finite path looks easier, faster, more rewarding. But the infinite player knows something the finite player doesn't. The short-term win is never worth the long-term cost. And the courage to stay the course, even when no one else sees it, is what builds a career that matters. Let me be honest with you. I haven't always gotten this right. There have been times in my career when I've chosen the shortcuts, when I prioritized numbers over relationships, when I played to win instead of playing to grow. And every time I did, I regretted it. Not always immediately, but eventually, because the finite wins faded. And what was left was the person I'd become in the process. So I learned, slowly, painfully, that the only game worth playing is the one that makes you better. Not just more successful, better. That's the message of the entire book. The infinite game is not about winning. It's about staying in. It's about building something that lasts. It's about becoming the kind of person who doesn't need the leaderboard to feel worthy. And it's available to you right now, today, if you have the courage to choose it. All right. Before we close, I want to give you something you can take with you, a few practical tools from today's episode that you can use starting tomorrow. Not theory, not philosophy, real things you can do. The first tool, and really the foundation of everything else, is learning to identify the game you're in. Before your next sales call, before your next meeting, before you check the leaderboard, ask yourself, am I playing finite or infinite right now? Am I focused on winning this deal, or am I focused on building a relationship that could last a year? This one question can change everything, because most of the stress in sales comes from trying to force an infinite game into to have a winner. It doesn't. There is no final leaderboard. There's only the next conversation. And when you remember that, you can show up calmer, more present, more effective. Which brings us to the second tool, writing down your just cause. Not your quota, not your income goal, your cause. Why are you in sales? What's the deeper reason? Write it down in one sentence, something like, I help people make confident decisions that improve their lives. Or I serve families so I can build a life for mine. Or I prove to myself every day that I'm capable of doing hard things. Whatever it is, write it down. Keep it somewhere you see it. And on the hard days, when the rejection piles up, when the numbers aren't there, go back to it. That's your anchor. That's what keeps you in the game when the game gets hard. The third tool is about trust. And it's simple. Ask yourself, am I someone my teammates can count on? Not in theory, in practice. When someone on your team is struggling, do you help them? When you learn something that works, do you share it? When you make a mistake, do you own it? Trust isn't built in big moments, it's built in small ones every day. And the more you invent every day, and the more you invest in trust, the stronger your environment becomes, which means you perform better too. Here's a quick exercise. Think of one person on your team who might be struggling right now. Reach out to them this week, not to fix them, just to check in, to ask how they're doing. That one small act builds culture, and culture is what carries you through the long game. The fourth tool is about learning from rivals. Pick one person, a rep, a competitor, someone in your industry who is doing something better than you, and study them. Not with jealousy, with curiosity. What are they doing differently? What can you learn from them? Then take one thing, just one, and try it yourself. This isn't about copying, it's about evolving. And the best salespeople are always learning from everyone, even the people they used to resent. The fifth tool is about flexibility, and it's the hardest one. Ask yourself, what am I holding on to that's no longer serving me? Maybe it's a script that used to work but doesn't anymore. Maybe it's a belief about what you're capable of. Maybe it's a definition of success that keeps you stuck. Whatever it is, name it. And then ask, what would it look like to let this go? You don't have to have the answer right away. Just asking the question opens up space for something new. And that existential flexibility, and it starts with awareness. And the sixth tool, maybe the most important, is about courage. Every day, you're going to be faced with small choices. Take the shortcut or do it right. Protect your ego or tell the truth. Play to win the quarter or play to build something that lasts. And in those moments, you have to choose. The infinite game isn't won in grand gestures. It's won in daily decisions. So before you act, ask yourself, is this who I want to become? Is this the person I'm proud to be? Will this choice serve me in 5 years or just today? That question asked consistently over time will shape your entire career. Let me say that one more time. 1, identify whether you're playing the finite or the infinite right now. 2, write down your just cause and keep it visible. 3, be someone your teammates can trust, especially in small moments. 4, study a rival with curiosity, not resentment. Learn one thing from them. 5, identify what you're holding on to that's no longer serving you. And 6, make daily choices based on who you want to become, not just what you want to achieve. That's the toolkit. That's the game. And you have everything you need to play it well. Let me give you one more bonus practice before we close. This one comes from my own experience, and it's made a huge difference. At the end of every day, or at least a few times a week, take 5 minutes to reflect. Ask yourself 3 questions. 1, did I play finite or infinite today? Not in general, specifically in that call, in that meeting, in that conversation. And then 2, what would my future self thank me for? What did I do today that's building towards something? Number 3, what would I do differently tomorrow? Not from a place of judgment, from a place of growth. This simple practice keeps you honest. It keeps you connected to the infinite game, even when the pressure of the day push you back towards the finite. And over time, it compounds. You become more aware, more intentional, more aligned with the person you want to become. I know this is a lot. 5 lessons, 6 tools, a whole new way of thinking about your career. But here's the thing. You don't have to do it all at once. Start small. Pick one tool, practice it this week, then add another. The infinite game isn't won in a day. It's won through consistency, small choices made repeatedly over time. That's how you build a career that lasts. That's how you become someone you're proud of. And that's how you finally stop grinding and start growing. Remember, you're not behind. You're not too late. You're exactly where you need to be to start playing the infinite game. The only question is, will you start? I believe you will. That's why you're still here listening. That's why you're here. Now go prove yourself right. So let me leave you with something. There's a passage at the beginning of the Infinite Game that I keep coming back to. Sinek describes two paths, one towards victory, the other points towards fulfillment. If you choose the path to victory, the goal is to win. You'll experience the thrill of competition. You'll rush towards the finish line. Crowds will cheer, and then it's over. Everyone goes home. But if you choose the path to fulfillment, the journey is longer. There will be hard times, but there will also be moments where you stop and realize this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Crowds will gather not to cheer for you, but to walk with you. And when your time is up, the people who walked with you will keep going. They'll carry what you built forward and inspire others to do the same. That's the choice we all face every day. Do you want to win or do you want to last? Do you want to be the number one for a quarter or do you want to build a career that still matters decades from now? I think about my journey a lot. The young kid at Movati Athletics chasing leaderboards, the fundraiser in New Zealand trying to prove himself, the coach, the trainer, the guy who thought success meant being the best. And I realized now, the best moments weren't when I hit the numbers. They were when I helped someone else break through, when I built something that lasted, when I connected with someone in a way that mattered, when I stopped worrying about the winning and started focusing on becoming. That's when the work stopped feeling like pressure and started feeling like purpose. That's when I stopped playing to win and started playing to stay in the game. And that's the journey that led me here to this podcast, to the Sales Evolution Lab. I could have stayed comfortable. I could have kept building what was already working. But I realized the Infinite Game isn't about comfort. It's about contribution. It's about using everything you've learned to help others learn it too. That's why I'm here talking to you right now. Not because I figured it all out, but because I'm committed to the journey and I want you to join me on it. So here's my challenge for you this week. Pick one thing from today's episode, just one. Maybe it's writing down your just cause. Maybe it's reaching out to a teammate who's struggling. Maybe it's studying someone you've been jealous of with curiosity instead of resentment. Whatever it is, do it. Not for the leaderboard, not for your manager, for you, the career you're building, for the person you're becoming. Because here's the truth. You're not going to remember the deals you close. You're going to remember the person you became while closing them. You're not going to remember the quota. You're going to remember whether you showed up with integrity. You're not going to remember who was number one. You're going to remember whether you helped other people along the way. That's what lasts. That's what matters. That's the Infinite Game. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening all the way through. Thank you for being the kind of person who invests in their own growth. It means more than you know. If this episode helped you, share it with someone else who might need it. Subscribe if you haven't already. And remember, the goal isn't to be the best. The goal is to be better than you were yesterday and to keep going. That's the game. Let's keep playing. One final thought. Sinek ends the book with a simple but powerful idea. None of us want on our tombstones the last balance in our bank account. We want to be remembered by what we did for others. Devoted mother, loving father, loyal friend, trusted mentor. That's what lasts. That's what matters. And in sales, a profession that can easily become about numbers and transactions, remembering that is essential. You are not a quota. You are not your close rate. You are not your ranking on the leaderboard. You are a human being with the ability to impact other human beings. Every conversation is a chance to make someone's day better. Every interaction is a chance to build trust. Every relationship is a chance to leave someone better than you found them. That's the Infinite Game. Not winning, serving. Not being number one, being someone worth remembering. I want to leave you with this. The path you choose, finite or infinite, will define not just your career, but your life. Every deal you close matters less than how you close it. Every relationship you build matters more than you think. Every small choice accumulates into the person you become. So choose wisely. Play the long game. And remember, the goal isn't to win. The goal is to keep playing, to keep growing, to keep becoming. So go out there, sell with purpose, lead with trust, learn from everyone around you. Stay flexible when the world changes and have the courage to play a longer game than everyone else. The world needs more salespeople who understand this. The world needs more people who play the infinite game. Maybe that person is you. This has been the Sales Evolution Lab podcast. I'm Kyle Mackey, and I'll see you in the next one.